Hannah stood in the staff locker room at the Gilded Spoon, staring at the wedding invitation in her hands until the gold lettering blurred. Brooke had written Hannah Scott and Guest in careful calligraphy, and those 3 words hit harder than any breakup text ever could. She knew Alex would be there, standing at the altar in his charcoal suit, looking like the man she'd spent 2 years planning a future with. And Danielle would be beside him, holding the bouquet, wearing the smile that used to belong to her best friend. The thought of walking into that room alone, of finding her assigned seat at some table near the back while everyone watched her eat her chicken breast in silence, made her stomach clench so hard she had to press her knuckles against the metal locker door. She closed the invitation and shoved it into her apron pocket. Hannah pushed through the swinging doors and scanned the room out of habit. Table 7 needed more water, Table 12 was still waiting on dessert, and Jamal Carter was sitting in his usual corner booth with a blueprint spread out in front of him. She'd been watching him for almost a year now. Every Thursday, same time, same table, same order, the ribeye medium rare, side of roasted potatoes, black coffee. He remembered names. Every single person who worked the floor. He knew Maria had a son in college, knew Paul was training for a marathon, knew Hannah took extra shifts on weekends. But there was something about the way he existed in the world, quiet and solid and completely unbothered by people's opinions, that made her feel like he was the only real person in a room full of performances. Her feet carried her to his table before her brain could catch up. The invitation was still in her pocket, a small square of dread pressed against her thigh. Jamal looked up when she stopped beside his booth, and for one horrifying second she forgot how to form words. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And you can say no. You should probably say no. It's insane. I know it's insane." He set down his pen and leaned back against the booth. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind of eyes that didn't look away from uncomfortable things. "Go ahead." Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Can you pretend to be my husband at a wedding?" The silence stretched. Jamal stared at her. She stared back, already mentally drafting her resignation letter, already planning to move to a different city where no one would remember the waitress who propositioned customers in the middle of dinner service. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. "Do I get to kiss my wife?" he asked, half serious, half testing. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Only if we make it convincing." For months ago, she had walked into Alex's apartment with a key she'd been given 6 months earlier and found him in bed with Danielle. The woman who had held her hand through every fight with her mother, who had helped her pick out the dress for her first date with Alex, who had sworn she would be Hannah's maid of honor someday. Hannah hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown anything or made a scene or given either of them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had simply walked to the dresser, collected the few things she'd left there over the months, a toothbrush, a phone charger, a paperback she'd been reading, and walked out. She hadn't cried until she was 3 blocks away, sitting on a bus stop bench at 11 at night, and even then it was the kind of crying you do with your teeth clenched so no one hears you. She never told Brooke. She never told anyone. What was there to say? That she'd been stupid enough to trust them both. That she'd somehow missed every sign, every cancelled plan, every glance that lasted a second too long. She had started to believe, in the months since, that she was simply the kind of person bad things happened to. The kind of woman who got and guessed on wedding invitations because everyone knew she'd be coming alone. Jamal agreed to her proposal with one condition: they needed to rehearse. "If I'm going to be your husband," he said, folding his blueprint into neat thirds, "we need to know things about each other that only a real couple would know. The small stuff. The stuff you don't think about until someone asks." Hannah nodded, feeling something loosen in her chest for the first time in months. Relief, maybe. Or the strange, unfamiliar sensation of someone showing up when she'd expected to be left behind. She walked away from his table that night with a plan and a phone number she already had saved in her contacts. She'd never told him how she got it. 6 months ago, he'd left his jacket draped over the back of his chair, and she'd found his business card in the pocket when she went to hang it up. She'd kept it. Not for any particular reason. Just in case. Their first meeting was at a coffee shop 3 days later, a small place with cracked vinyl booths and a barista who didn't care how long you stayed. They sat across from each other, two strangers about to construct an entire marriage out of thin air. Jamal ordered black coffee. Hannah got tea she didn't drink. He opened his notebook to a blank page and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "First question," he said. "What are you most afraid of when you see Alex again?" The question landed somewhere deep, somewhere she'd been trying not to touch. "You're treating this like a deposition. You're giving me facts. Facts are easy to memorize. Facts are not the same as knowing someone." He leaned back, his coffee untouched, his posture relaxed in a way that made her aware of how rigidly she was sitting. "If Alex asks me what you're like in the morning, and I say, she was born April 17th, her father's name is Hank, he's going to know this is a setup before the appetizers are served. Tell me something real. Something that isn't on a form." "I hum when I'm nervous. Old jazz standards, mostly. I don't even realize I'm doing it until someone points it out. I can't sleep with socks on. I've tried. My feet feel like they're suffocating." She paused. "I'm terrified of being a bridesmaid at this wedding. Not because of Alex. Because I'll have to stand up there in front of everyone who knows what happened, and smile, and pretend I'm fine." The words hung in the air between them. Jamal didn't look away. He didn't offer sympathy or reassurance or any of the things people usually offered when someone admitted something that raw. He just nodded, once, and said, "Okay. My turn." He told her about his work. Not the surface-level version, not "I'm an electrician, I fix things," but the way he talked about it when no one was asking. He described reading blueprints the way other people described reading novels, the satisfaction of tracing a circuit from its source to its endpoint, understanding how every component fit together. He told her about the time he'd spent 3 days troubleshooting a short in a residential building in Queens, how the problem had turned out to be a single wire that someone had stripped too far back 15 years ago, and how one mistake that small had been causing intermittent outages for over a decade. "Electricity doesn't forgive," he said. "It doesn't care about your intentions or your excuses. You either respect it, or it teaches you respect. And the lessons are never gentle." Hannah realized she was leaning forward, her tea gone cold, her notebook forgotten. He talked about electricity the way some people talked about the ocean, or music, or God, with a reverence that was completely unself-conscious. She recognized it. She'd seen that kind of devotion in chefs who'd been working the line for 30 years and still showed up at 4 in the morning to start the stock. It was love, the real kind, the kind you didn't have to announce because it was obvious in everything you did. The second meeting was at her apartment 3 days later. She'd cleaned obsessively for 2 hours before he arrived, then messed up the kitchen on purpose so it wouldn't look like she'd cleaned obsessively. Jamal showed up with a bag of groceries and a blueprint tube under his arm, and when she asked what the tube was for, he said, "We need photos." Photos? Social media. Couples post photos. If we've been together for months and your Instagram looks like a ghost town, people will notice. They spent the afternoon constructing a relationship in 6-second increments. Jamal stood behind her kitchen counter holding a wooden spoon, his expression hovering somewhere between amused and genuinely happy, and Hannah took 17 photos before she got one that looked natural. She captioned it "My husband cooks" and posted it without thinking, and then she sat on her couch and stared at her phone for 20 minutes, watching the likes accumulate, watching for one name in particular. It came at 9:47 p.m. Danielle had commented, "So happy for you." 4 words. No exclamation point. Hannah didn't respond. She turned her phone face down on the coffee table and didn't pick it up again for the rest of the night. The touching came next. That was the hard part. Jamal was careful about it, almost clinical, at first. He placed his hand on her lower back the way you position a tool, deliberate and precise, and Hannah had to fight the urge to flinch. Not because she didn't want him to touch her, but because it had been so long since anyone had touched her with intention that her body didn't know how to receive it. They practiced standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. They practiced the way he put his arm around her during the reception, the way she'd lean into him during the toasts. By the end of the second hour, they'd gotten comfortable enough that Hannah forgot to count the seconds before she pulled away. The third meeting was at his job site, a half-finished office building in downtown Brooklyn where Jamal was running electrical for the 3rd and 4th floors. He met her at the security gate with a hard hat and a pair of safety glasses, and she followed him through the skeleton of the building, past exposed studs and concrete floors and the distant sound of someone operating a pneumatic drill. He showed her the panel he'd been working on, a maze of color-coded wires and breakers and handwritten labels, and he explained how the entire system worked, how power came in from the street, how it was distributed through the building, how a single misplaced connection could take down an entire floor. When I was 26, he said, not looking at her, I got offered a job in Chicago. Big commercial outfit. They were building a new hospital, needed someone to run the electrical team. It would have been the biggest project of my career. Hannah waited. The pneumatic drill stopped, and for a moment the building was completely silent. My mother got sick, he said. Pancreatic. They gave her 6 months. She lasted 14. He traced a wire with his finger, following it from the breaker to the conduit. The wedding venue in Lower Manhattan was exactly the kind of place Hannah had expected Brooke to choose: exposed brick, industrial beams wrapped in fairy lights, a string quartet playing something classical that Hannah couldn't name but recognized from movie trailers. She stood at the entrance with her invitation clutched in one hand and her other hand pressed flat against her thigh, trying to stop her fingers from trembling. Jamal appeared beside her before she could spiral. He'd come straight from a job site, but he'd changed in his truck: navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, his hair cut close and fresh. He looked like he belonged in a magazine spread about men who built things with their hands and then cleaned up impossibly well. When he took her hand, his palm was warm and dry and steady, and something in her chest unclenched for the first time in 4 months. "They're here," she said, not looking at him. "I know." His voice was low, calm, the same tone he used when explaining electrical panels. "You want to stand here for a minute or you want to get this over with?" She almost laughed. "Get it over with." Brooke spotted them from across the room and practically sprinted over, her white dress billowing behind her. "You came." She hugged Hannah hard, then stepped back and looked at Jamal with undisguised curiosity. "And you must be the husband." "Jamal Carter." He shook her hand, smiled easily. "Congratulations. The venue looks beautiful." "Oh, thank you." Brooke was already scanning the room, and Hannah knew exactly who she was looking for. "They're by the bar. Alex and Danielle. Just so you know." Hannah nodded. She'd known they'd be there. She'd prepared for it. What she hadn't prepared for was Alex walking toward them 20 minutes later, Danielle trailing behind him like a reluctant shadow, her champagne glass held too tightly. "Hannah." Alex said her name the way he used to, familiar, possessive, like he was testing whether it still belonged to him. "You look great." "Thanks." The word came out flat, and she was grateful for it. Alex turned to Jamal, and Hannah watched the assessment happen in real time: the quick scan of the suit, the posture, the way Jamal's hand rested on her lower back without gripping, without claiming, just present. Alex extended his hand. "Alex Turner." I'm an old friend of Hannah's. Jamal took his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, his eye contact direct but not challenging. He didn't puff up his chest or square his shoulders. He just stood there, 6 feet of calm, and said, Rat vui doak gap. Nice to meet you, Alex echoed, and Hannah saw it, the flicker of uncertainty, the slight retreat. Alex had expected something else. A handshake he could turn into a dominance contest. A man he could measure himself against and find superior. Jamal gave him nothing to grab onto, and that nothingness was the most devastating thing he could have done. Danielle said something about the flower arrangements, and the conversation dissolved into pleasantries. Hannah barely heard any of it. She was too focused on the fact that Alex had already stepped back, already created distance, already surrendered whatever ground he'd thought he was going to claim. The first slow song of the night came an hour later, after dinner, after the toasts, after Hannah had laughed genuinely at something Brooke's father said and realized she hadn't been performing for at least 30 minutes. Jamal stood and offered his hand. Dance with me. It wasn't a question. She took his hand and let him lead her to the floor, and when he pulled her close, one hand on her waist and the other holding her fingers against his chest, she felt the strangest sensation, safety. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of something solid. They moved in silence. His breath was warm against her temple. The string quartet had been replaced by a DJ playing something slow and acoustic, and Hannah closed her eyes and let herself exist in the space between one moment and the next. I haven't felt this way in 4 months, she said quietly. What way? Like I don't have to watch my back. Jamal didn't answer. He just pulled her a little closer, his thumb tracing a small circle on her waist, and Hannah let her head rest against his shoulder. The song ended. Another began. They kept dancing. Come on, she whispered. His hand tightened on hers. That was all. That was enough. She found Alex waiting for her near the restrooms 2 hours later, when the reception had started to thin out and Jamal was across the room talking to Brooke's uncle about commercial real estate. Alex stepped out of the shadows near the coat check, and Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs before her brain could tell it to calm down. Hey. She stopped walking. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit, empty except for the two of them. Alex had loosened his tie. His eyes were glassy from too much champagne. What do you want, Alex? I miss you. He said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. Danielle was a mistake. I know that now. I've known it for months. Hannah stood very still. 4 months ago, those words would have destroyed her. 4 months ago, she would have felt something, hope, anger, grief, desire. Now she just felt tired. You don't get to say that to me, she said. Her voice was steady. She had no idea how. You don't get to bring me here and then corner me in a hallway and tell me you miss me. That's not how this works. Hannah. No. The word came out stronger than she'd expected, and Alex flinched. You made your choice. You don't get to unmake it because you're bored or guilty or whatever this is.